I'm making this quick reading here because the Paris landmark church Notre Dame caught on fire a few hours ago, and I got the chart. I wanted to look at this. It's a horrible, devastating event for the world, really. This beautiful church. I've been there, I won't say many times, but I've been to France about 4 times, and it's like the first place I went when I went to France the first time. When I went to Paris the first time, is I stopped on my way to another place, which was a little south. I was staying with actually a French girlfriend who was staying in a suburb called Sceaux, which is south of Paris. But before I got there, I stopped. The RERB from Charles de Gaulle stops at the Notre Dame, so I stopped on the RERB and stopped and went into Notre Dame first, and then got back on the RERB and went to Sceaux to see my friend. Unbelievable that the spire has fallen and this iconic landmark is being destroyed as I speak. Now, I wanted to bring up the chart to look at this because, of course, such a monumental and universal uniting point, convergence point of humanity is going to be significant astrologically. We're going to see the significance, meaning that the whole world is seeing this, just like 9/11 in the U.S. It has that kind of moment, like you're going to remember where you were when you saw that Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris is on fire and that the spire has collapsed, the roof has collapsed. As I'm watching it now, we're hoping that the walls don't collapse, because now the roof is not holding up the building. In these old Gothic churches, the weight of the roof also supports the building's integrity. This is how they were built. They were built where, structurally and mechanically, this large roof would support would bring pressure down that would keep the walls stable, and the stability of the walls would support the massive roof. So we see in the chart we have a Virgo ascendant, and I want to just illustrate a couple themes that I've been talking about lately and that I talked about before. Rahu went into Gemini and Ketu went into Sagittarius. One of the big things I talked about was the church and churches in general. I literally said the word church about 50 times. Catholic Church, I said. Pope Francis, and all of the problems with the Catholic Church and whatnot are going to be issues. But literally, even perhaps the most iconic Catholic Church in the world has just been burned, is being destroyed. Again, that's not exactly what I said by any means. I didn't say Notre Dame was going to burn or that the Vatican was going to burn. But the church itself was going to go through major change and transformation, which is what I said. And again, not just because I want to get predictions right, but I'm looking for this symbology. This is, of course, going to bring focus on Francis and the Catholic Church. He'll have statements and can be uniting, dividing. Some might see it as, again, I hesitate to say things like this because it's not like I believe them, but all of the scandals in the Catholic Church, now one of the most iconic symbols being destroyed. Again, not like I see it this way, but there's the church itself has been under so much pressure for the last several years with all the priest scandals and abuse and all of that. Now we see maybe the most famous church in the world. The only other one that would be more famous would be the Vatican, but I wonder if the Vatican is even more famous than Notre Dame. I don't know. First place you go in Rome is not necessarily the Vatican. Maybe. Vatican, of course, has the Sistine Chapel and whatnot, but the Vatican is also much more closely guarded than Notre Dame, which brings me to another idea that it's a soft target. And I'm not saying that I think it's an act of terrorism, but it's conspicuously close to Easter. And right now, especially, we have, again, this is the week of celebration of Easter that this accident happened, so to speak. We're going to look at the chart here, but I already mentioned one thing, which is the transit of Rahu into Gemini, and especially Ketu Saturn very close in Sagittarius now. Again, Sagittarius is the sign of churches. Again, it's ruled by Jupiter, and it's the sign of churches. Pisces is more the sign of mystics, mysticism, even, gurus like, Yogananda and all. That's more Pisces. That's mysticism, metaphysics. Church is Sagittarius, right? And look at what happened. Jupiter poked his head in the Gandanta point again. Talking about Gandanta, this is where Rashis and Nakshatras break in between water and fire signs. Jupiter has been hovering on the Gandanta point. He just turned retrograde a few days ago. I just recently did a video where as soon as Jupiter turned retrograde, we had all that stuff happen with Assange being arrested, other stuff in the US, Brexit getting reversed, all of this stuff happening with all these shocking, unusual reversals, even the discovery of a black hole, pictures of a black hole. Again, all these kinds of things. Of course, Jupiter, as the indicator, the Karaka, the planet of religion, going retrograde, especially at the very early degrees of Sagittarius, again, the sign of churches, and in the nakshatra of Mula, which is literally about uprooting, destroying, purifying, is utterly specific and rich and symbolic of something like this. Again, let's understand it's in a fire sign, right at the edge of the fire sign. This is where we have Jupiter right now, who just turned retrograde at the earliest degrees of this fire sign. So again, Jupiter pokes his head into Sagittarius. He stops, turns retrograde. Right as he's retrograde, literally 11 minutes of 11 minutes into Sagittarius, and Notre Dame, perhaps the most famous cathedral in the world, Catholic Church, is destroyed. Let's hope the walls don't collapse, which would be even more devastating. And if there's somehow some way for something to be salvaged, the French people will. I'm watching the live coverage on the TV right now. I'm not going to cry here, but it's hard to believe Notre Dame is truly one of the most special, awesome places to go. Now, a few other things to look at here. We have a couple planets on Gandanta, on the Sandhi, which is changing signs. We have the Sun is also very powerful in the 8th house from the Ascendant. It's a Virgo Ascendant. The ruling planet of Virgo, Mercury, is debilitated. So it's a debilitated Lugna Lord, ruling planet, when this happened as well. This could show right away to me, this shows that maybe it's more personal carelessness and not terrorism. That's just first impression. I'm going to read the rest of the chart because I haven't worked through all this. But that's my first impression, because Virgo is about maintenance. It was under reconstruction. Maybe somebody overlooked a detail with Mercury retrograde, overlooked something, forgot to blow out a candle, for God's sake, at the church, made some mistake, and the place went up. Again, I say blow out a candle, that's maybe naive, but something, an oversight. Why? Because I say Virgo, which is details, and the ruling planet Mercury is debilitated. This is the kind of thing that Mercury debilitated can do, where you overlook some detail, right? We also have Venus, which is the powerful planet for Virgo because it's the 9th lord. Venus is also Sandhi, within minutes of going into Pisces, which, by the way, if we run this forward at least an hour, 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, 3 hours later, Venus goes into Pisces. So you see that Venus is right on the verge of being exalted at this point. So Venus, but again, you see these last degrees, and why last degrees can be so important, because Venus shows a sort of grace and protection. Let's hope that there's not a high loss of life, which we don't know at this point. I'll keep reading this to see what we discover. So again, the other thing is Sun is in the 8th house. Exalted in the 8th house. It's the 12th Lord in the 8th. So again, that's called a Viparita Raja Yoga. Again, I first went, because 8th house has to do with death, loss of life. Also, hopefully it's just this fire changing and transforming the church. Literally, it's the church. Again, this is almost quite literally what I said about this transit of Ketu and Saturn through Sagittarius, is to transform the church and destroy certain parts of the church where it needs to adjust, where Pope Francis has been answering for these abuse scandals and whatnot. And here we go. This blazing fire has consumed probably the most iconic Catholic church. So this is exalted Sun destroying something. And again, it's the 12th house Lord in the 8th. So it's a Viparit Raja Yoga. 8th house is the destruction, and 12th house is of confusion, not paying attention. So it can show where the thing that's getting taken away, it's destroying something that's getting taken away. So again, I would see this, this could portend some loss of life for sure. And again, we're not seeing this yet. It could also show where that danger has been taken away, because the fire could have maybe started while there were people in the cathedral during the day or something like that. Also, though, it shows a possibility for some kind of foul play a little bit. 12th house being foreign actors, foreign agents, like literally like terrorists or something like that. Again, 12th house is also not paying attention to things. Well, like I said earlier about the Mercury retrograde, the Mercury debilitated in Pisces. So this could also show a doubling down of that effect. And in fact, now that I'm talking through it, again, you're hearing my thoughts in real time. The fact that you have Mercury in Pisces weak, which shows that not paying attention to details, and also the 12th Lord, the Sun, which also 12th house has to do with not focusing and paying attention to details, being involved with this exalted Sun in the 8th, that could show a similar theme. But 12th house, again, also has to do with foreign things, foreigners. You know, the Notre Dame is a soft target, as terrorists would identify it. Meaning, it's an open space, open building. So, I'm not saying that looks likely at this point, but I am describing it because it does look like a possibility. I'm going to also talk about the D30 in a minute, but we also see the moon is in the 12th house as well. It's in Magha Nakshatra. It's in Leo. So Leo is, of course, a fire sign as well. So you can see all these planets in the fire signs. The sun just went into the fire sign. The moon is in a fire sign in Leo. Of course, that's using sidereal zodiac. In tropical zodiac, it's not. So again, Ketu Saturn is also in Sagittarius, fire sign. Of course, it's not that in tropical. So again, these are the reasons why I see the sidereal working. The sun just went into Aries. Again, of course, it's been in Aries tropically for a while, but it just went into Aries in its exalted state yesterday. So again, this shows a shift. You look for things, several things shifting. We also again have Venus at the edge of a sidereal sign here, which again, this is sidereally. So I point this out because, you know, these case studies can help people understand how these zodiacs work. Now we also have Mars, which has to do with fire, is up here in Taurus, in the 9th house. 9th house has to do with religion and churches and spirituality. Also, like I said earlier, the 9th house and also Sagittarius have that quality. So we see Mars, the fire, in the 9th house here as well. And again, this is a chart for local time Paris. 6:50 p.m. Paris time. This was the chart at 6:50 p.m. Paris on April 15th. Mars was in the 9th. And Ketu, Saturn, Jupiter were in the 4th house of this fire sign. And by the way, we want to also understand the 4th house has to do with buildings and structures. Literally, it has to do with your home, right? And you know this. And so again, this is Paris, and like the home, like a structure burning. There is no building in Paris more identified, perhaps more identifiable than Notre Dame for Paris. If there's one building that you look at to represent Paris, perhaps the Arc de Triomphe, right? Paris has a lot of iconic architecture, maybe even the Pompidou Center now, but chief among them is Notre Dame as a destination to go to. Arc de Triomphe is something to look at, but then you're on the Champs-Élysées to walk down and you see the Arc, you know, the Arc de Triomphe. But it's not like you go visit it. I mean, you go visit it, but you just look at it and see it. Notre Dame, you visit, you go inside, you revere this building that has been there since the 11th century. 11th century, it's almost 1,000 years old. Well, it is 1,000 years old. However, I don't know the exact date, but it's about 1,000 years old. Boy, what a loss. So now we look at the D30, which is the chart we look at for tragedies. And we see that Mars is in the Lugna of the D30 in the Ascendant. And we see this, we still have the Moon in the 12th, but we have this Saturn, Rahu, Ketu, Venus, all in the 8th house. Look at all these planets in the 8th house in the D30. So Mars in the Ascendant of the D30 in Paris, which of course Mars is fire and explosiveness. And we have 3 malefics in the 8th house in the D30. Let's look at the D9 as well, because this has to do with church and whatnot. So again, here we have Mars in the Lugna again. Yeah, you can see because it's very near the same degree in a Earth sign. And we have Saturn in the 7th house in the D9. So let's look at the 9th Lord would be Saturn is in the 7th. We have Jupiter retrograde and the Sun, this exalted Sun, in the 12th house. So this Jupiter retrograde in the 12th house of loss. So you can see all these themes of loss in the D30 as well. Moon in the 12th house of loss. It's just loss. That's the easiest way. Even without considering the Viparit Raj Yoga here, the 12th house is loss. And the Moon shows the loss. Like the feeling of loss. The world feels like it's lost something. A collective sadness and a collective loss. You know, it was sad when we saw the Twin Towers fall in New York. It was shocking to see this. Just like right now, it's shocking to see Notre Dame burn. But the Twin Towers, they were they were office buildings. They were places of business. They weren't like beautiful. They weren't like from the 11th century. They weren't a place where you go and you're like, wow, and your breath is taken away by the sheer beauty of the structure and the history and all that has happened. Notre Dame is a transformative experience. You don't visit Paris and not visit Notre Dame. You don't not put that on your list. And now it's gone. And the world has lost something that was 1,000 years old, one of the most beautiful, iconic buildings, if not the most beautiful, iconic church in the world. So this feeling of loss and collective loss, because the moon rules the 11th house. And the 11th house is things that we all share, that the culture shares. If it's a culture, it's not just Parisians, it's not just French people. It's all of us, because how many have visited Notre Dame? Or how many have just seen it or wanted to visit it, who will now never get to visit it? So let's hope that it doesn't get worse. We don't know if there's been a big loss of life yet. We don't know if the walls are going to collapse. We don't know if it was terrorism. We're not sure. Again, you see there are firefighters, as I'm watching it now, there are firefighters surrounding the building. But again, if the walls were to collapse outwardly, for example, it could imperil them. It's very dangerous. Very dangerous moment. So I wanted to make this video to show these things that have been talked about, that I talked about in summits and my independent videos, my Rahu Ketu free webinar with Rahu Ketu going into the Sagittarius Gemini axis. This is real stuff, real change, real transformation that we're going through right now. So I hope this was helpful.